a story about what my Black neighbors said to me when I moved out that I want to tell later. So I think some of the exhaustion that I felt throughout the process was searching 2 months ahead of time and not being sure about what was going to happen. And then that stress kind of snowballing into the kind of final search situation that I had. I was pushed out because of gentrification. It's just wild. It's wild to think about. All right, hello YouTube, it's Prince here and welcome to another one of my videos. If you're here, you've probably seen one of my New York apartment hunting videos that I've posted on this channel. If you haven't, go and check those out. Also follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram at SweetBlackPrince. You can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/PRShakur. And these are all ways that you can support my channel just by clicking, liking, commenting, subscribing, which helps boost it in the algorithm, and also going to Patreon helps you support me and get early access to videos and other essays. But enough of that, let's dive into the topic. So I am in Ohio and I'm not in New York anymore, and these past few weeks have been absolutely bonkers, and it's because of this apartment hunt that I've been on that has caused me a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. It's given me a lot of existential questions about life, capitalism, adulthood, anarchism. And I posted about it a bit on my TikTok, if you want to follow me on TikTok. And that video went really quickly viral. And I was talking a lot about rent-stabilized apartments in New York City. And this article recently came out that stated that there are roughly an estimated 13,000 empty rent-stabilized apartments in New York City. And the article goes into why. I really wanted to talk about that on social media because when we're looking at economic inequality, this inequality can come up in many different forms, and there are many different tactics that the state or the elite or capitalists use in order to trick people out of fair and accessible, affordable housing. To kind of rewind back into how everything went kind of wrong in my apartment search, all these little mistakes and little things that I could have learned or known, or if I'd known, it would have helped me better in my process. So let's talk about all the mistakes I made. I moved to New York in September of 2020. For the 4 years before that, I was living where I am currently right now, Columbus, Ohio, which is the capital of Ohio. It has a pretty reasonable cost of living, but is still a city that's being gentrified. And I've lived in Seattle and other places where it's kind of like larger or growing cities and gentrification is happening, but I'd never been somewhere where it felt particularly like New York as I've experienced it over the last few weeks. But moving to New York, I was really excited. I didn't really know anyone that was looking for housing in the city. So initially, I don't even really remember what my plan was come like last July, August. But I ended up posting a lot online and saying that I was looking for subleasers. And that led me to finding someone that was the sister of someone I went to college with. And this person also had two other friends that were looking for housing. So I was like, okay, if I can hop in on a lease, that would be great. I know I want to live in Brooklyn. I hopped in on this apartment search with them, and we were searching collectively, the four of us, for maybe 2 weeks. I met them over FaceTime. Appreciated them, but don't necessarily vibe with every kind of white person. Sometimes I get bored. We went into our apartment search together. I'd say we maybe applied to 2 different places, and we applied to this place where I saw the videos of, and I was like, okay, this place looks pretty decent. It's in Brooklyn. We applied, put down a good faith deposit. And for those that don't know, a good faith deposit, or it might go by other names, but a good faith deposit is when you are applying for an apartment or a particular unit of housing and you put down a good faith deposit during the application in order to kind of up your chances of being accepted quicker. And if you're rejected, then they give you the money back, but it's also like this housing system tangling up your money even more in a way that I don't think is necessarily fair. We put down a good faith deposit, and I was already kind of like, a broker's fee, good faith deposit, what is this? This seems like exploitative. But we got the apartment, and I was happy because I didn't have to put in that much effort. And then I moved in, and I was like, oh, this apartment is like a lot smaller than I felt like I realized from the videos. And the room that I ended up having didn't have a closet. It had windows, but there wasn't any central air. We had kind of one of the classic New York apartment layouts, which is when it's an open concept kitchen, dining room, living room, which was just one square room. Off of that was one bathroom, and then off of that central room was also our bedroom doors. And so to me, the apartment very much felt like a quad that I was paying $1,000 roughly a month to live in. And I didn't really like that idea. And granted, the apartment was in a good location, it was cute, but in retrospect, I realized, oh, one of my roommates has a really wealthy family and had a guarantor sign on with us. And that one guarantor probably made close to or around the 80 times the rent that your guarantors to amount up to 80 times what the yearly rent cost is, or it's 80 times what the monthly rent cost is, which is absolutely bonkers. So living there for a year, not totally being satisfied with the location, wanting new roommates. When this summer rolled around, I was like, okay, let's see what my options are. Let's see what else is out there. I knew I wanted to move to find larger space. I knew I also wanted to move to have a bigger room where I could write in, where working remotely from home would make sense. And I knew I wanted to live preferably with maybe 1 or 2 other people. And so those were my goals initially when I started apartment hunting around last June, July. July was really busy for me, so I really started hunting in like July/August. And before we go into why things really went wrong in my apartment hunt, I want to do a quick kind of explainer about some of the basics around New York City housing right now and why the housing market is so intense and messed up. So we're going to dive into a few different research pieces that I found that are going to be useful to understanding why things are happening in the way that they are. So first is there's this timeout piece that says that New York City is officially the most expensive city in the world. And the reason I bring this up is because if we're thinking about New York City and housing, there is a certain kind of understanding when you live there and you move there on like a general level, like you're gonna be paying a lot. What is considered reasonable here isn't considered reasonable elsewhere. And I do feel like once I lived in New York City, that kind of shift over how I thought about money. In New York, if you spend money on one thing, you kind of justify it by saying, oh, the stress of doing this in another way is not good, so let me just spend the money and have less stress. Does that make sense? But this timeout piece says that New York City is officially the most expensive city in the world. It is the first time that New York City ever tops the list. Last year, the Economic Intelligence Unit used the World Cost of Living Index to deem New York City one of the most 10 expensive cities in the world. As expected, given the constant increase in our average rent prices and living expenses, our very own town has actually topped the list this year for the first time. Right now, it's literally one of the most expensive times it has ever been in New York City. Another piece that I found is specifically about Brooklyn. And since there's these rising housing costs, there are a lot of different reasons, but one of the biggest sort of topics that people dive into and want to talk about with housing and lack of affordable housing, especially in New York City, is gentrification. Gentrification is the process of people with more wealth or resources moving into a particular geography or neighborhood and paying more, upping the rent prices, upping the prices at the bodegas, and really changing what the kind of economic reality of that neighborhood is. And I can say for me, in the past, I've always thought of gentrification as something that is like economic or racial, but after posting about this situation on my TikTok numerous times, one person raised a really good point, which is that gentrification is also the process of people that are from other places who don't understand the housing market in a particular place that they're moving to, accepting conditions and prices that will inevitably hike up the prices for other people that are from there, that have lived there longer. And essentially, if I'm looking back, this is the process that I participated in. I mean, granted, I was the only Black person in the lease that I signed. I felt better about being a Black person in a neighborhood where I felt like hipsters and white people were moving into. I know that I'm poor, so I was like, oh, all these things mean that I'm not a gentrifier, right? But looking back, I utilized the people that I had access to in order to move into a place that, however many years ago, wouldn't have been that expensive. And there's also the topic of how do you fight gentrification when you really want to live in a location? What are the social and political choices that you make? But I feel like that is a whole other video. And there is this piece with Next City called In Brooklyn, America's Gentrification Epicenter, building on a model for community care. There's a particular part of the piece that reads, Melvin Rivera, a housing and social rights activist and longtime Bushwick resident, agrees with Travis, his fellow member of the political art collective Mi Casa No Es Su Casa, and can attest that this transformation didn't happen overnight. In order to make room for gentrifiers, Rivera says, landlords make homes uninhabitable. Then they rebuild and refurbish their homes, and now they figure, hey, instead of renting to this multi-generational family that lives here at $1,200, we could start renting individual rooms for $1,000 to $1,200 each. Consequently, property values rise, often pushing lower and moderate income homeowners to foreclose on taxes. It's a trickle-down effect, says Rivera. The problem with keeping most long-time residents in their homes is that because Brooklyn is more of a renter's market, it makes it harder to protect residents from the whims of predatory landlords. This summer, rent increases in New York City broke records. forcing renters in Brooklyn and Manhattan to put down more than 50% of their income towards rent, which is simply untenable for the many New Yorkers living paycheck to paycheck, and also who are still vulnerable to the physical and financial risks that caused the pandemic. And this is such a good excerpt from this because it breaks down the difference between the renters market and the housing market in New York. It breaks down what choices landlords make in order to profit more over time and how that works towards gentrification, and also how these housing costs are going up and up and up. And if I think about my neighborhood, the most vocal and visible people on a community level were always the Black people hanging out outside. It was always the people where I'm like, where are you working? Are you retired or what is it? And looking back, I realized those were long-time residents. Those were people that have either rented in their apartments or their units for years and years, if not decades, or people that sometimes own these places. And I think that is a beautiful model for how the city can be protected and should be protected. And there's a story about what my Black neighbor said to me when I moved out that I want to tell later, and it kind of really made me sad, and it brought this home about how I felt good about being a Black person moving into the neighborhood, but I think in retrospect, I would have felt better if I was also moving in with other Black people and we were able to find a more reasonable place. And I think this part of the conversation is interesting because there is this distinction of either you have the resources and money to be able to get into a place, or you have the time to get into a place. And I think rich people have the resources and money. Poor people might have the time, but if you're poor, you're working a lot. So then the time it takes to find a reasonable sort of place to live in is also a sort of exhaustion. It stresses you out. And I definitely experienced this my last few weeks in the city. For those that don't know, brokers are typically people that are kind of the middleman between the realty company or the landlord and the person who is attempting to sign a lease. So a broker will typically respond to you when you're messaging places on Zillow or Craigslist, etc. They'll typically tour you the place, and they'll typically be the kind of in-between you and the landlord. And I know a few years ago, New York City passed a new rule that said that it's illegal for landlords to put the broker's fee onto the tenants that are trying to sign a lease. And so this whole topic of the broker's fee is definitely something that becomes a huge obstacle to people that are looking for equitable housing. I know when me and the most recent batch of people I looked with were thinking about where we wanted to live, I know that one of them was like, I absolutely don't want to pay a broker's fee. And I'm like, I'll pay a broker's fee if it means we actually have a place to live. And this is kind of the push and pull that people experience when they're trying to pay what's reasonable, but also being impatient. And I even saw a rent stabilized apartment on my street that cost, I think it was like $2,500 for a 2-bedroom, which is already a lot. And then there was a broker's fee, even though this place was rent stabilized. And I remember that broker's fee was like $4,000. And I was just blown away, because how can you charge a broker's fee for a place that's supposed to be rent stabilized in order to make that unit more accessible to poor people? It just doesn't add up. It's exploitative. And even now, like, these broker's fees shouldn't really be a thing, but they are. And then the last kind of quick kind of thought bubble I want to bring up is about generally the story of housing and what housing has looked like in New York City. And so much of New York City's history is tied to communities of color being pushed out or things being built on that have serious, significant historical value. Many people don't know that there used to be a thriving African American community there. African-American Seneca Village, which is where Central Park used to be, offered the opportunity to live in an autonomous community far from densely populated downtown. Despite New York State's abolition of slavery in 1827, discrimination was still prevalent throughout New York City and severely limited the lives of African Americans. Seneca Village's remote location likely provided a refuge from the climate. Compared to other African Americans living in New York City, residents of Seneca Village seem to have been more stable and prosperous. By 1855, approximately half of them owned their homes. There is precedent of there being communities where people from similar backgrounds secure housing in a location and are able to build on that over decades or time. There are a lot of really ethnically homogenous communities in New York, and I'm really interested in what housing looks like in these communities, or how they protect each other, and what these models can look like on a larger scale level. So now that we've kind of unpacked the different parts of why the New York housing market is like this, I want to break down some of the very clear mistakes or missteps that I made when I was searching for my apartment. I started looking around June, July, asking people like, hey, I'm gonna be moving somewhere else in the city soon. Like, are you looking to move? Do you want a roommate? Do you want to live together? And I'd say in my first month and a half, I had 3 different roommate situations fall through. One was with someone I wanted to move in with, and they were waiting to hear back from their roommate. I waited like a month to hear back. Shouldn't have waited that long. Another situation was with 2 friends, one who already lived in the city and one who didn't. So that didn't work out. And so I'm thinking like, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna need to find a sub? So come late July, I finally found people that seemed like a good fit to live with. We started searching. Another part of this is, so there are the mistakes of not having the right kind of roommates to live with. You should have roommates that you're searching with that have similar searching styles and strategies. So people that are equally going to contribute to searching, send each other properties in the group chat. People that have similar kind of income styles and similar savings. So if one person out of all of you has a really low credit score, that's going to hurt your chances. If one of you doesn't make a lot of money or doesn't have high proof of savings, that's going to hurt your chances. And then also looking with people and being very clear about what neighborhoods you want to live in, because I think in retrospect, I was so excited to live with certain people or so excited to have the prospect of living in a certain neighborhood. I was more about like, oh, wanting the process to be easy and not necessarily totally holding true to some of the things that I really, really, really wanted. Searching too early, especially in the fall around college move-in season, which is when I was looking, you probably want to look at that month, if like probably not the month before, because a lot of places go really quickly. If you're really close to when a lease date starts, you have a higher chance of signing and your application being more competitive. And so I think some of the exhaustion that I felt throughout the process was searching 2 months ahead of time and not being sure about what was going to happen. And then that stress kind of snowballing into the kind of final search situation that I had. Another mistake I made is that I have been self-employed for like the last 7 years. Sometimes I do better at my taxes, sometimes I don't. Me and all of my roommates didn't have competitive applications. We're all self-employed, we're all artists. And if someone makes a household income of 40,000 more or they have better guarantors, it just doesn't work in your favor. And when you apply to places again and again and the application fee is $20, $30, it just really sucks because you're pouring money down the drain, applying to places, and then you're also pouring money down the drain, like maybe sometimes putting in a good faith deposit because you really want a place. And it really just isn't the most fair system to people that don't have a lot of money that might be putting their money towards something in order to get an opportunity that they want, and one that can just easily slip away from them. I think there are a variety of things that people can do to make their applications like way better or more competitive, and one of them is just making sure you track your income better, looking at your investments, your stocks, at the other forms of income or random sporadic pieces of income that you get throughout the year. And if you have a job where you're self-employed, don't say you're self-employed, say you're a working journalist. When you are messaging people and saying like, hey, I'm interested in this unit, 2 strategies that you can use that are really going to cut through a lot of the waste and sort of people wasting your time is, 1, give as much information as you can. So share your name, share how many people you're trying to live with, if you have pets, what your household income range is, whether or not you have guarantors, what your credit scores are. So by handing across this information earlier, it allows the landlord or the broker to make a more educated decision about whether or not they want to rent to you, because sometimes these people that you're messaging will give you the runaround, or they'll message you that one day and then get back to you another day. Making sure all of your documents and files are really organized so you can be prepared to apply as much as possible in a singular Google Drive file, and exporting that as a PDF and having that to send to people is a much quicker process than having to upload all these different files and documents. And so I think with these kind of mistakes I made over time, not only was I looking too early, I was also looking with some of the wrong people. We didn't have the same strategies. Like by the end of this search, I realized most of the searching that I've been doing has been with an application in a time of the year where so many people with money moving into the city, with people who have parents that can pay for their school, or they have scholarships or loans or whatever, these people make more competitive applications than me and my friends did. We toured a place, really liked it, really decent price, good amount of space, good light. We fell in love with it. The guy touring the place, essentially the broker, really liked us, communicated as much as he could, but then 2 days after we applied, the landlord's mom died, and then they stopped responding, and the middle guy kept trying to call them, and he kept saying like, oh, I think you guys have a chance, blah, blah, blah. A week and a half later, we're waiting, we're checking in. It was a no. And so we waited essentially a week and a half for a no that if we'd gotten it in 3 days, we could have maybe found something else. A lot of these places, when you apply to them, won't even tell you that you've been rejected. And so another tip that I would have is to be really persistent about checking in with these places and saying like, hey, I want to know if my application has been processed. Are there things that I could do to kind of bolster my chances? Because there are 1 or 2 times where I went back in and checked with people and asked that question, and they were like, oh, the apartment was rented 4 days ago. No one told you? And I'm like, you were supposed to tell me. Oh my God. Just talking through all of this is just wild. And the fact that I was pushed out because of gentrification, it's just wild. It's wild to think about. I got so exhausted looking with other people that eventually it made sense for me to potentially look at studios. And so I applied to one studio, and really this was kind of my breaking point with the whole New York City housing and being frustrated and wanting to fight through, is that if you move to New York City in order to prove to yourself that you can move there or to experience the big city life, and things like gentrification or high housing costs or whatever it may be push you out, don't hold yourself to this standard where you tell yourself like you failed or you're not good enough. I think the reality is that there are economic realities that cities involve. And I think over my last year living in New York, I appreciated all of the cultural things that I got to experience and the artists I got to meet. But on an economic level, as an anti-capitalist and an anarchist, New York City is a very difficult place to live in. The struggles towards housing rights are very real and necessary. And I think if I ever move back, it's something that I want to dive into and learn more about and participate in, because it is such a barrier to people that want to move to New York City and live these authentic lives and work and be artists or just contribute to the city in like a really meaningful way. And it makes me sad that throughout this process, I felt like I was less than, when in reality, it's one, a matter of gentrification. It's a matter of what economic choices I'm willing to make, and then also what I want to be offered back by.
Okay, so this is the end of this video. My camera battery somehow died and I missed out on the last 6 minutes of this video, which is hilarious. But I kind of ended on the note of reinforcing that you can move anywhere you want as long as you're being conscious and trying to be a good participant in that new place. And a city like New York City will always be there. Theoretically, you can always go back if you need to spend time away to better your life financially or economically. That's not a bad thing. And I think New York has this romanticism to it that isn't necessarily always, it doesn't always match up with what the experience is like. So I wanted to end on that note. Please like this video and comment with any kind of tips that you might have about New York City apartment hunting and whether or not you are more likely to live in the city after watching this video. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you